when will this be over? Let me just get up to the big screen now. Of course, I'll take you through a little bit more of a journey here and tie this all together, because in the first presentation, we did have a look at all the fundamentals around what people are saying. And quite clearly, we went through this initial period. And this initial period was very alarming. And we got all these messages like schools are closed, we can't travel, there's lockdown, you're working from home, etc. And you're then faced with wearing masks and social distancing and all the hygiene factors that we'd like to see. Underpinning this and what we've seen and heard earlier is, you know, this whole element around this, and quite rightly so, is this fear and somewhat confusion about what's going on. And it's fear of the unknown. It's fear that will I get the virus? It's fear for my family members. It's fear for my job. It's fear for will I go out? It's fear for all of these factors that could impact your life in some sort of way. And the key to that is we don't really know. And if we don't really know, it's very hard to say what's going to happen for that future. But we see all these signals, and that's the initial context around how we view things. The second thing I'd just like to put out there is, you know, we see all these comments, and usually you'll see a number of the statements that come out, and they usually start with something similar to this. And you know, when you look back at a lot of the experiences that we have lived, and there's actually quite a lot more than you think. And Dave, you'd referred to this earlier with SARS, and having lived through that in Singapore and seeing and experiencing it, what was like. Yeah, there's a different situation in this, but we always learn from all those experiences, and trying to put all that together is key to how we come out of it. I think one of the elements I just want to bring up, and having worked in the US at the time, behaviors do change and they evolve, and this happens, and it's regular. And I'll bring up a big situation, obviously, in the US, which was 9/11. And this picture says to me, when I was there, how things, even small may be, but big in some cases, that changed dramatically. And we went from a world before 9/11 where security wasn't as bad. And now, from that 20 years on, we still have to take our shoes off, and we still have to take our belts off when we go through the airports. So yes, some things do change, and behaviorally they will still change, and we would expect that those behavior changes would continue absolutely as a result. Again, they may be small, but there will be impact as a result of this, given the world and the way in which the world has had to deal with this situation. I think in the first presentation too, there was different ways, and everyone to look at different ways of how we look at the pandemic. And usually there's, as defined, there's probably the three periods. There's a peak, and we went through that with a fear and uncertainty, and hopefully we're experiencing recovery, and hopefully bouncing back in the near future. How quick that's going to be, let's talk a little bit about it and see how we go. The peak stage, this comes from studies that we know, and you know, you'll experience this yourself with your own feelings and attitudes, but behavior does change, and initially it happens, and depending on what country you're in, this behavioral change also varies. You know, buying and hoarding food, cleaners, medical supplies is up there on top of the list. There's also the frustration and the extent to which madness kicks in on why me, or why this situation, and how does it affect me. Actually, Thais are pretty resilient, and they're very adaptable, and in some cases they've been through situations that they can apply this and adapt, and we see that it actually changes quite quickly. And there is a lot of Thais who are now aware of the situation, understand it, and are thinking pragmatically about how they would change and what do they need to do to change in order to make it successful. They have to. There's no alternative for many of them. They have to make those changes, whether it's economic or not. It's going to happen. There's also a controlling of emotions that also plays a role in here, and the madness and the confusion, and in some cases some of the fear, slowly dissipates, and we're now thinking more positively about how we should evolve and how do we come out of this in the best possible way we can. The last element is more around making sure it's good for the future and being future focused on this. And again, you start to see elements around what I can do for the future and how I can adapt and be flexible around it. These models apply. Of course, it helps in some way to understand what we need to do around it. Of course, for brands and everything else, there's obviously a lot more at stake here. And of course, depending on the size of the businesses and what's at stake, then of course it'll vary. In the presentations that we've seen today, and no doubt conversations that you've had with different clients around this, you know, the main key factor here is survival, no matter how you look at it. Okay, it's a reality to it, and survival's probably key. Around that, it's also an opportunity for brands to start to build on what they have, whether it's purpose or something to do with changes in strategy. What we know, and Dave has mentioned this earlier, is if you are a brand and you remain as it is today and do not evolve for the future, then it certainly wouldn't be an option. I think every presentation that we've seen, if you're doing the same thing as you did pre-COVID, then you will struggle to survive. Examples of this, this was a study that Vitamins and Marketbuzz here is, while there are businesses that have to relook at things, and we'll talk a little bit about that, there's also businesses that we've seen which are going to benefit and gain. And of course, clearly the hygiene factor, which were very impressive figures on growth rates and things like that that we've seen earlier, is significant. Not the only ones, of course. If we flip that around, and Paul spoke about the difficulties and challenges around the food and beverage business. And clearly what you can see here is some categories that we looked at, of course, there'll be less spending, others remain the same, and there is plenty of categories there that are going to increase. Yeah, this is based on the current situation, of course, not the future situation. So things benefit, of course. Lockdowns and everything else have got an impact on F&B, fine dining, even street food and alcohol. But yet on the other side of things, home cooking has certainly increased, and the ability to bring food in and make your own drinks or food and create a masterpiece, as I was saying earlier, and sharing that with your communities is certainly increasing. It's not to say that others are not struggling, it certainly is, but there's plenty of opportunities out there, as we can see. I'll tie this back to a number of key points that I just want people to take away and link this back to the presentations. Of course, Kantar and Nan spoke about elements around need states. I think it's important. I think people need to revisit those needs. There will be evolving needs, not necessarily major changes in needs, but they still need to be looked at. Channel changes are also happening. What you'll find is that digital is now accelerated even further, and you've got significant changes even on growth rates from online shopping, particularly to do with certain categories. Even mobile banking has increased, particularly to do with mobile apps. No longer do you go into the branch, you're using the mobile app, and more so. But also seeing earlier on the customer journeys, particularly to do with hygiene, and revisiting some of those elements are also key to it. So having a look at those journeys, redefining channels in particular. And this just shows you the past week rate of online shopping, food delivery, mobile banking, and you've got significant usages of all three, and redefining how people are integrating and mixing with brands is ultimately going to accelerate as well through these channels. The second element, and again, this was spoken about too, and you know, one of the learnings, and again, David brought this up as well, if you stop the conversation around what you're trying to do for the brand, then others will start to take over. No longer will people know about your brand if you lose them, particularly in the current environment where most of the conversation is going to be around COVID anyway. Just linking that back, the messages have changed. And again, we saw this with the presentations that we heard earlier, and there's changes in the way in which people communicate and how they're communicating with those messages. And I just encourage, when we look at this, to have a look at the way in which we do it. And just as a different angle around this, and just to add a little bit more to it, your messages ultimately change and evolve depending on whether you're in the peak or the bounce back or recovery periods. Most likely you're wanting advice, and you're wanting security, and you're wanting safety, and all of those elements are really key when you don't know anything about what's going to happen for the future. The fear side of it, the unknown elements kick in. And this is an example of Uniqlo in China changing their strategy around to redefining and making sure that their messages were all about safety and advice to their customers on safety and ways in which they can be safe. And it got very positive feedback from obviously their customers with that change. So messages can be different, but my point to that is it does change depending on the period that we're in, and you have to remain with that as well. We see it in Thailand, same thing happens with Thailand as well. In this case, we've got, of course, the contactless delivery. Paul was mentioning earlier about the question, and we still ask the question around this. And yes, we've got a delivery driver delivering my food to me, or perhaps it's online shopping. And we're asking the question, where did that delivery driver go before me? Well, of course, one of the ways and strategies that has come out here is the contactless delivery, and to try and reduce that fear element around that driver and being able to deliver things in the best possible way without the contact. Also, challenges exist around this, of course, just grab as an example, but not only that, you've got the whole industry doing it, and having the same message at the same time, communicating it, makes it a category element. And of course, everyone offers the same and no point of difference. But we move on from that, and we can change our strategy and our tactics, and perhaps there's temporary tactics around this as well. And we know it's a time in which brands can shine. We've heard that from Craig and also from Neil. We've heard it also through the other presentations as well, that purpose keeps coming through, and that purpose is an opportune time now to look at what your brand stands for, or potentially how do you airlift some of the purposeful elements around it to ensure that your brand shines. People want brands that have a purpose. There's no question around it, and they will choose one brand with a purpose over another. It's just a question of how that is communicated and what you do around your strategies that can help through. I'm just highlighting some elements around this that'll just come through. This is, of course, messages that are coming through, not only thanking Thais for staying home, but also thanking the medical staff, which goes beyond what the company delivers, but provides a meaningful element around how they're connecting their brands with the ultimate consumers and Thai people in general. Grab does it as well, but in a different way. They're also talking about how they bring community together and how they're giving jobs out to people and how they're shifting people over. And of course, they need it as well. There's no question around it. But offering positions for them to deliver the packages and food and so forth certainly gives people jobs in a time where it's much needed as well. The fifth element, and again, we heard earlier on this, and this is important, agility and being able to pivot is really critical when you're looking at your brands over this time. And being able to change plans and do it in a quick way. I've just got two examples to show you here. The one is what also Paul was referring to earlier in going direct to consumer. And this is from Frito-Lay, and they never did this before, but had to produce a direct to consumer with the situation and had to do it in a month, and produced and opened a new channel up in 1 month just to get product direct to consumer, and had to react very quickly to it. More locally, if I give you another example for those who know the GQ brand, it had a very successful campaign around the white shirt, and particularly around throwing stains on it. They ultimately shifted to producing a shirt here for Songkran. Of course, that was met with the COVID virus, and they completely changed and pivoted to producing masks through their textiles, and changed changed the production line to produce the masks. In addition to that, making different types of masks, and then taking a different channel approach and putting it even in vending machines where you can buy the masks themselves. So agility and being able to pivot real quickly on certain product lines is also helping businesses to survive also in this period. Last point to wrap it up, I think none of these businesses, none of the ways in which we're operating is going to work without leading. And that is really important for all businesses, and it comes from the top. Again, it was also mentioned on this. I've particularly chosen this picture, which happens to be the Prime Minister of New Zealand. And she's got great acclaim for a number of situations she's had to deal with just in the short term she's been Prime Minister. But to take a very strong leadership role, lead from the front with visibility, good command, and giving people confidence in the way she's making the decisions is ultimately critical here. And all companies, all brands need to take a similar approach to this. And it's not just about the external side, it's about working on the internal side, who are endorsers of your brands, who are endorsers of your products, and having them feel confident that they're working for a good company through this period, a solid company, and being able to produce good quality products and being able to make it through this situation to the future. Okay, so there's your 6. We've gone through the 6 of those as we've gone forward. I'll just skip forward because the $1 million question was, when will this be over? I think we can all agree we're actually not sure. When we ask people ourselves, is it going to be 1 to 3 months, 4 to 6 months, or greater than 7 months? Well, a third, and a third. So if you ask general people, they're about as confident as us of saying, when will it end? Actually, we don't know. But what we can plan for and what we can do in the short term is ultimately going to help us in the long term. And I think however long this goes, we have to see a brighter light out of this. We have to take the opportunities when they come up, and we ultimately have to see our way through this no matter what. So hopefully I've tried to wrap this up with all the rest of the presentations. I'd just like to close in saying We've put this together because we had a lot of information and asking questions around some more fact-based information, some understanding what it means for the future. And hopefully this gives you some elements to help with your businesses and helps with your clients in your own businesses over the short term and the longer term sustainability for your companies.